Alright, YouTube, this is a video about Obama from several of his statements from several days ago and also his statements earlier today. It seems like Obama has gone off the deep end, so to speak, and instead of taking responsibility for his actions, has decided to blame everybody else for things that have gone wrong during his, especially his second term, but also his first. Uh, Generally speaking, a president is held responsible for most of the things that go on in the Congress is never popular anyway. Congress, their approval usually is below 25%. Sometimes it gets down into the teens, like right now. Nobody gives a shit about Congress because they're always seen as constantly arguing and bickering with each other, which is basically true. You see very little, especially since Bush took office, since around 2000, you haven't really seen much in the way of cooperation in Congress. Very, very little, other than right after 9/11, and most of the laws and regulations and so forth passed around that time were actually bad ideas, and of course that's biting them in the ass right now with things like the NSA. So you can talk about that as well. But let's go back to Obama and his comments. His first comment was about race, about racism, and Obama essentially said that a lot of the some of the slide in his approval since he's been elected was due to racism, due to whites. Something about the softening of the white voters towards him due to racism. And on its face, this makes sense. Of course, yes, there are people in the country that never approved of him because they were racist. There were plenty of people who still don't like blacks. There are also people who don't like whites and would never vote for a white candidate, which is why Obama got over 90% of the black vote, because there are black racists as well who said, well, Obama will take care of me because he happens to share my skin color, whereas Romney, he's that old white cracker. It's the same thing. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to point out that there are black racists too. Nobody wants to point out Asian racists or Hispanic racists, yet they do exist in quite large numbers, the same as with any racist group. But here we go with Obama. What he actually stated can't be true. Yes, there are those who are racist and thus don't approve of him. However, any loss in his credibility, any loss in his approval, can't possibly be due to racists, because if a person hated blacks, they never would have approved of him in the first place. They would have been one of those numbers that disapproved of him to begin with, when he was around 70% approval when he was first elected. That segment of the population that disapproved of him, yeah, there were probably racists amongst that number. However, they never approved of him to begin with. So any loss in his approval can't be due to people simply deciding to become racist. That doesn't really make any sense at all. If anything, racism has been declining in the United States for some time. The only time you really see it reigniting is in areas where there are a lot of races mixing together in a small area, usually an urban area. You don't see it much in small town America, but in urban zones, that's why you also have crime. People are living like sardines anyway. They keep to their own communities, and then you get crime when they intermix. Which is a sad truth, especially places like Chicago, New York City, someplace like that. But these comments make no sense, because racists never would have approved of him to begin with. So how the hell is it lowering his approval rating if they never liked him to begin with? They would have been registered as disapproving. As for his comments about Rush and Fox News, essentially he chalked up his inability to get things done to the existence of Fox News and Rush Limbaugh. Number one, the fact that and his racial statements came out so quickly in conjunction with one another leads me to believe that right now he's desperate, and he's pandering essentially to party loyalists and to racial loyalists to try to cobble together enough approval and to try to cobble together enough support so that he can get things passed. It reeks of desperation. If Bush had done something like this, if Bush had, in his second term, when he started losing credibility too, halfway through his second term when he was on the skids, if he had suddenly started ranting about gays and abortion and black people or something to try to cobble together, the racist whites and the evangelicals into a more solid support bloc. Everyone would have understood this. Everyone would have been pointing it out. But because it's Obama, very few people are actually talking about this. I hate to say it, but while Fox News is the most popular televised news channel in the United States, that's true, it still does not account for even half of all of the political commentary going on. More and more people are looking online for material. Places like CNN and the New York Times are way ahead of Fox when it comes to online content. And there are a million different independent blogs out there. There are internet radio shows. There are podcasts. There are Ustream and live streaming channels. There are a million different venues for people to talk about politics online. For him to say that Fox, and by the way, TV news is in steady decline across the board regardless of what organization you're looking at. They're all in decline. People are getting more and more news from online. For him to point to Fox or Rush is even a better example. Rush's popularity has been dropping off the radar because nobody wants to listen to him anymore. For him to chalk up his inability to get bills passed, that makes no sense. He hasn't been blocked from putting in legislation so much as he hasn't put anything in there. Aside from Obamacare, what's the last thing that he talked about wanting to get passed? Immigration reform. Well, the Republicans have already expressed interest in similar ideas of immigration reform. The difference is, with most presidents, the president and their supporters in Congress, of course, and then the opposite side would be debating and hammering out some sort of agreement between the two of them. Obama is not willing to work with anybody. He's not even willing to work with the Democrats in Congress, who have actually stood up to him several times now, partially because his approval rating is so low that they're afraid that if they work with him too much, and I'm sure he doesn't want to work with them anyway because he thinks he's better than them, they're afraid to work with him because then there'd be guilt by association and their own approval rating would plummet. Nobody wants to party with Obama right now. He's too unpopular. So these racial statements that he's making and these statements about the extreme right-wing media or Rush or what Rush is quite far right. I would say Fox is definitely right-leaning in general, although they have a few people on there who are more centrist. For him to blame his inability to get things done on one TV news outlet, one largely outdated AM radio station host, and the existence of some conspiratorial gigantic clump of racists in the United States, it makes no sense, and it comes off as desperate. This isn't the 1920s. We don't have 2 million Klansmen walking down Pennsylvania Avenue. We don't have people getting lynched on a regular basis. You don't hear many stories anymore about people burning crosses on people's lawns. His inability to get things done is completely on him because his ideas are bad, because he is dishonest, because he is unable to account for all of these scandals going on. They directly implicate him. How can he chalk it up to, how can he have so little humility that he's not even willing to take responsibility for these things? He didn't take responsibility for Obamacare, and although, again, I think the NSA is the biggest problem currently affecting the United States. There are some who agree and many who disagree. Most people think it's Obama, though. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Well, Obama came out and said, yeah, we screwed up, but don't worry, we're going to make things better. Months later, nothing's working better, by the way, than it was before. They keep lying. They keep trying to release inflated numbers of people who have supposedly signed up, only to find out that these are either deliberately exaggerated numbers, or they account for a large number of people who visited the site and looked at plans but never actually signed up, and people who signed up and never paid, and people who went into plans that weren't even on the, things like Medicare, Medicaid. He never took responsibility for any of these things. He never even addressed the IRS scandal beyond merely the most basic of covering it in passing. He left that to his flunkies. Well, Obama right now, look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership. that had to be leaked again by WikiLeaks because nobody wanted the public to find out about it. Even the Democrats in Congress right now are stonewalling him on the TPP. Alongside, here, just a sec. Kitty, come on. Yes, you can go out. Have fun. The Democrats themselves are stonewalling this and have already said that they're not comfortable with having to pass this bill without having time to actually discuss and read what's in it. That's the point. When things like this happen, when they try to force legislation through, things like Obamacare, the Patriot Act, things along those lines, when they don't give Congress the time to read a deliberately obtuse, deliberately too long of a bill, it's because they're being dishonest and they want to foist something on the American public that they know will cause outrage, that they know will cause problems, but yet for some unknown reason they still want. In the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it will cause jobs to move overseas, possibly millions of them. It will fuck up environmental regulations. It will fuck up the internet. It's essentially got SOPA 2.0 tacked onto it to allow more censorship and the death of the what the hell is it called, that net neutrality. The death of that doesn't bode well either, because in conjunction with the TPP, it would essentially give a few corporations, a few ISPs, and the government direct control over the entire internet, because let's face it, the United States is the net hub of at least the Western world. Obama needs to learn, if he wants to be seen as credible, if he wants to be seen as not lying through his ass, if he wants to be seen as someone who's got a little bit of respect behind what he says and isn't just blatantly lying every time he opens his mouth, he needs to address these issues directly, and he needs to stop trying to cast blame on other people. You look, Benghazi. I ignored Benghazi, largely, because I didn't care. When it first came out, I said that's regrettable. It's a bad situation. It doesn't look good for people like Obama and Hillary, but there aren't enough details yet to actually make a real decision on whether I think that they were even involved in this decision-making process. Now it comes out that even on that I was completely wrong. It turns out Hillary was basically solely responsible for what happened there. And people, of course, on the left, and by left, I won't say groups like the New York Times, actual journalists and reporters, because they've largely started questioning Obama too. I'm talking about essentially CNN, MSNBC, which are his flunky networks, and then leftists, the independent left groups that never say anything bad about Obama, like the liberal pages on Facebook or whatever. They go out and they swing for Obama and they say, well, there were all these consulate attacks under Bush, and they conveniently don't point out that Bush never actually tried to blame somebody else for these things. To him, it was part of the war. Not excusing Bush, of course. He should have been impeached years before he left office. He should have been impeached. And the Iraq War was absolute disgrace to our nation. Now Obama, and here's the other thing, he continues to warmonger in Syria. There was a report. I'll tack this on here for instead of making a separate video before I close this out. Syria. On the 17th of January, not a week ago roughly, the New York Times reported that the war crimes forensics units sent by the UN had determined that these thousands of people who had been tortured and executed had been tortured beforehand and then executed by Syrian rebel forces, the FSA essentially, and Al-Qaeda in Syria, because the rebels were being forced out of several strategic locations they had dug in. And they had prisoners, so they killed them, because obviously you're not going to drag thousands of prisoners with you when you flee, and you're sure as hell not going to let them go free so they can rejoin the army or go out and tell everyone what a terrible organization yours is and how you tortured them. So they executed them. CNN comes out 4 days later, takes the same report, But instead of admitting that the War Crimes Forensics Unit sent by the UN determined the rebels had been the ones responsible, they flipped it around and, using absolutely no source whatsoever other than their own imagination, made a story about how Assad's forces had tortured and exterminated thousands of people and that this is evidence of war crimes. Well, CNN is doing this because CNN is the paid mouthpiece of the White House. Kerry himself probably emails the people at CNN to tell them, oh, this is a good idea for a story. This will be great for our invasion plans, because they want to go into Syria. And not by limited strikes. They want to flatten Assad, kill him off, kill as many of his men as possible so that Syria gets taken over by anarchy and Al-Qaeda takes over. Because then the Saudis get their pipeline and the Israelis no longer have a Shiite northern neighbor and everybody in the region is happy. All these people that the US does so much to prop up and trade with. That's the reason for it. The governor, Kerry, who used to be a peacenik, is now culpable in attempting to kill off tens of thousands of people, while oddly, amusingly, blaming Assad for killing thousands of people when it was actually the other side, the side that we still to this day are funding and training and arming, exactly like we did in the 1980s with the Taliban against the Soviet Union. They're the ones that are doing the actual killing. Assad's forces are largely focusing on exterminating Al-Qaeda. And the Syrian Free Army hacked CNN yesterday and put that information on their Twitter, their Facebook, and their politics page. And oddly, despite the fact that our own media calls Assad and all these people extremists, they're the ones that are acting relatively sane compared to the Al-Qaeda fighters over there. So there's another Obama problem there. He comes out with his lapdog Kerry and continually pushes for war in Syria. And twice they got beat down. First, on the, Assad is destabilizing the region. Nobody cared, because the region was already destabilized. Secondly, he gassed his own people. But people wised up, and something like 90% of the population said no to war in Syria, which I thought was a good thing. I think the American people showed that they're capable of acting rationally in the face of sensationalism. Now it's Assad is butchering prisoners, Assad is torturing and executing people, and nobody cares. Kerry and Obama have yet to realize this. The entire country, except for maybe a quarter of the population that will do whatever they say, no matter what it is. They would march off a cliff for their chocolate Führer. Obama and Kerry have not understood yet that the American people have gotten tired of them, just like they got tired of Bush. The boring, old, white, crazy Bush, who's, let's face it, he had Alzheimer's by the time his second term was up. Complete asshole, complete crazy, crazy warmonger, crazy greed-mongering neocon, Bush. Bush slammed the country into the ground. He destroyed essentially as much freedom as he possibly could while killing hundreds of thousands of civilians over in the Middle East. People eventually got bored with his tirades and stopped listening to him. Bush, at least, for the last 3 years or so of his second term, had the grace to stop speaking publicly, for the most part. He was essentially a shut-in president. You didn't hear very much from him. He went over to Africa and did some tribal dances in Africa to pretend that he cares about the dark people over there, even though he probably would have loved to run a plantation and own slaves, just like every other fucking crazy neocon would, because he's a complete asshole. Bush pretended to care about Africa, Bush pretended to care about the Iraqis, and he had a good strategy to take care of Saddam's nuclear weapons. And then Obama is pretending to care too. He pretends to shed those crocodile tears and care about the Syrian peasants getting mowed under by Assad's tanks. In reality, the rebels are the ones killing all the civilians. Assad's forces are killing about 1/10 the civilians that the Al-Qaeda folks are, and this is Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda-backed groups, affiliates of Al-Qaeda, and people who we hire to go in there. There are probably all sorts of U.S. mercenaries killing civilians, and Obama comes out and says, well, the reason why I can't get anything done is because of Fox, because of racists, and because of that terrible Rush, who nobody takes seriously. He was a pill popper ranting against drugs. Nobody cares about Rush. Nobody cares about Fox. This generation We get our news online. We don't watch Fox, generally speaking. We don't watch MSNBC either. Maybe go to their website. I go to CNN.com every day. I see most of their stories as complete bullshit, but I still go there so I can have a good laugh and troll people. That's what most people from the younger generations do because we're tech literate. We don't need TV anymore. It just rots your brain anyway. At least the internet's a little bit more free than the fucking TV because there are still independent bloggers and chat rooms and shit. But no, I don't give a fuck about Obama's skin color. I disapprove of him because of the content of his character. Just like Martin Luther King probably would have hated him too. Martin Luther King was a hardcore evangelical Baptist minister, so that wouldn't bode well for Obama right there. And he shunned reverse racism. The idea to him, had he been alive to see it, of minority groups granting themselves special privileges based on their skin to overcome the white privilege, so to speak, would have been shocking to him. All he was saying was people should live together and essentially ignore one another's race and not give a shit about it. Instead, we're still focusing on race. We still say, well, we don't say President Obama, we're all thinking first black President Obama. It doesn't matter if he's black, he's still a failure. If he were white, he'd be a failure. If he were an Asian female, he'd be a failure. If he were gay, he'd be a failure. He's a failure. Kerry's a failure. It's a good thing. Looking at Kerry's behavior now, I look back at the 2004 election, I say there really was no choice. Kerry is so dishonest, it wouldn't have mattered if he had beaten Bush. They would have been exactly the same. And essentially, he turned into a war hawk as soon as he got a little bit of power under Obama. He would have been even more of a war hawk. He would have kept the wars going and nobody would have given a shit. He would have been a Democrat, so he would have gotten a free pass. Well, all these people are a bunch of assholes. Obama's blaming everybody but himself for mistakes that he himself made. It's like you walk up to a lamp, smash it with a hammer. The cat did it. It's childish. It's juvenile behavior at its finest. The man is a complete narcissist. And there will still be that subsegment of the population that says, but he's got dark skin, so anybody who also doesn't have dark skin, if you're black, you can criticize him if you want. It makes you an Oreo, but you can still criticize him without being racist. That's what the supporters of Obama say. But like me, I'm white. So when I criticize Obama, I must be a Tea Partier. I must be a KKK member, something like that. I'm not. I'm from the far north, from the most liberal state in the Union. And I voted for Obama. And I'm going to call him out because he's an absolute abject failure and asshole. That's what he is. On the other side, yes, there are some people who dislike him because they're racist and for no other reason. They don't even know probably what Obamacare is. They don't know anything about the actual scandals. They're too focused on this color of his skin. But they're no different than the people who support him because of his skin either. They are the same breed of animal. It's no less racist for somebody to support Obama because he's black, so give him the benefit of the doubt, than there is someone to say, well, I hate that Obama, and you ask them why, and they say, because he's black. They don't have any other reasoning behind it. They don't understand. They don't know. They don't know why they dislike him. They're looking at his skin. Lots of people support him because of his skin, too. If Obama were white, I have no qualms about saying he probably would have been impeached by now. The fact that he happens to be the first black president is protecting him from impeachment. He's essentially being privileged. He's part of that privileged class. People say, well, that's racist. Guess what? Obama's rich. There's a lot more difference between a rich person and a poor person than whitey and blackie. It no longer matters in most parts of this country. If you're not in the Midwest or the Deep South, nobody gives a fuck, except for a very small number of people. So no. Obama is not going to get a free pass from me for saying, well, Fox is responsible. Nobody cares about what Bill O'Reilly says. Nobody cares what Sean Hannity says. And Obama, you can tell when he speaks now, he's being as smug as ever. The only difference is he's lost the pep in his step. He's gone from essentially being extremely charismatic to being someone who looks run down. And I can understand that, and I wouldn't blame him for people are running him down, but they have a good reason for it. essentially destroying the country, exactly what Bush did. If it were up to me, I'd like to see him impeached. But then again, if it were up to me, shortly after he took his second term in office, Bush would have been impeached. So that's about how far it goes. 2 failures in a row. Wow, America. And the next election looks promising. Because I can only think of 1 or 2 people from either side of the aisle who I can honestly say I don't think would be abject failures and be the 3rd failure in a row. That's the final nail in the coffin. You get that many failed presidents in a row and you've got significant problems. The last time that happened, we had the Civil War. And you can look at the presidential greatness rankings. And after the Civil War, of course, you also had a string of very bad presidents. Those were